Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about data, my favorite topic. I'll take you through the next 30 minutes. We will look at market performance. So based on the registrants of today, I picked markets that I think will be able to accommodate many of you. And if not, you can always reach out to your local Amadeus or TravelClick representative after to get any local market information that may help you as you start to build your recovery. I'll talk about some high-level advice or considerations for building your recovery roadmap. I know that that's well underway now. And for the first time that we've spoken about this, since COVID started, I will discuss some channel information. So I think you'll find that very insightful as you start to talk about your distribution strategy moving forward. And so some of those things maybe you haven't started to think about as granular as that. So maybe after today, you'll start to think about how you can have the right data to be able to think about the distribution strategy. And then as Audrey mentioned at the beginning, I'll leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A in case you have any questions. So market performance. So I think it's good. I'm not sure if everyone on the phone or in the audience is a customer of TravelClick. So I'll talk a little bit about the data that I'm going to show so that it's very clear about the data that we're talking to. So we are actually showing here on the books data. So this isn't any forecast or anything like that about what's going to happen in a market. This is strictly on the books data that we get from about 40,000 hotels globally that participate in our Demand 360 product. So again, it's on the books data. We get group block, group pickup, or sold reservations against a block, and then also all transient reservations across all channels. So we have this looking out a year as well as historically. So without further ado, let's look at some data. So I think it's good to start kind of high level here and just understand what has happened, right, in the past few months. I think it's crazy to think how much has changed in such a short period of time. So if you look back in January of this year, what we're looking at here is net booking activity. So this is, the green line is the net reservations, which is reservations after cancellations. And if you look in January, for the week of January 5th, for any future date, about 12 million reservations were made in that week globally for all future stay dates. And that's based again on the data that we have from our participating hotels. So you can see, very strong, as we know, 2019 was a very strong year. And then you can start to see as you get into, end of February, beginning of March, where of course China was already impacted and we were starting to see really the rest of the world become impacted by COVID-19. And it's really, to me, mind-blowing to see on March 15th what happened, right? We were down 5 million reservations, meaning we had more cancellations than reservations in that week for any future date. So the good news is that we are on a positive trend here. And as of May 31st of that week, we booked about 3 million reservations for any future stay date. So I know it's kind of hard to see that number there, but it's about 3 million. So we're nowhere near the 12 million that we were pre-COVID, but we are seeing positive signs of a recovery. And I really feel that when you start to look at year over year, it's very hard to understand where we are because the numbers are so drastic. So I really like to be able to see what's happening from a net booking activity and are we seeing positive growth. So you'll see more of this as we go through, as we talk about local markets. So another thing I find very interesting here, so what we're looking at is, again, from the beginning of this year, really out through the end of the year, December 27th, 2020, that week. And you can see when the year started, some of those occupancy numbers that we were looking at in the high 60s, mid 70s, and how it started to taper off for this year, right when you start to see COVID happen. So I should back up and explain too that what we're looking at here is transient and group sold reservations. I chose to leave the group block numbers out because what we're finding in the data is that, especially as you look into Q3 and Q4, people are not necessarily removing their blocks from the system, or they haven't moved them yet to the new date that they're working on for a certain meeting or event. So I wanted to leave that out just to not to skew the numbers. So what we're looking at is groups sold, which would be pickup, and then all transient reservations. So you can obviously see the big gap between last year and this year as we started to get more into COVID as it grew globally. But my point here really is when you're looking at the future dates, and even in your own pace report or your brand pace report that you may be looking at, you kind of start to look into the future and you say, those pace numbers seem okay. But what I'm going to show you today is we're not seeing that long-term activity, meaning bookings happening outside of 90 days. So there's not a lot of activity going on in the second half of the year. And so I think it's really important for us today. We'll focus more on the summer months because obviously the booking window as we know it has completely changed and we're in a very short booking window. So I'll take you here. So I thought it would be good just to see from a region and country standpoint. So I just kind of picked again based on the registrants, pretty much all of the regions, and then a few specific countries again that we'll deep dive into throughout the next 20 minutes or so. So you can see this is from June 7th through September 12th. So I know, more from a US mindset, I would say we kind of did this right around the US holiday of Labor Day, where we still see a lot of leisure travel happening. So that's how we kind of determine the dates there. But you can see from an occupancy standpoint how the regions are doing, and then also the individual countries. So you can see, United States pretty strong at 8.5%. Even Canada looking better at almost 6%. But we'll see in just a minute how definitely Canada still has some room to grow as far as their net bookings. Okay, so again, we'll start with the United States and we'll do a deep dive here, and then we will move to some of those other countries that I mentioned. So this weekly net booking activity, similar to what we looked at right at the beginning, I think is very interesting. So for the United States overall, pre-COVID, we were looking at about 6.5 million reservations made each week. And you can see how we had the decline and then obviously positive movement every week since April 12th. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we'll continue to see that grow. So now at about 2.5 million reservations, again, that week of May 31st. So here, we picked some major markets, obviously, to look at because that's really what people are mostly asking about or typically asking about. But what we're seeing in the data is the strongest occupancies are not in these major markets. They are in resort type markets. I would say, for people in the United States, really that Florida Panhandle, South Texas, and then even in some of like the Midwest, you're starting to see, some more leisure activity happening. That's where we're seeing the strongest occupancies, and in some cases up to 60% transient occupancy in some of those markets. But for the sake of today, looking at some of the major markets, I think is interesting to understand how are the major markets faring from a transient standpoint. And of course, we'll continue to monitor that to see as we get more into the summer and people maybe have a different comfort level with traveling, and as we move into the different phases, depending on the city of recovery, we might see these numbers start to grow. Okay, so I'm about to get complex here, but I really wanted to share this data. So I'm going to do my best to explain. There is the Q&A button, so if you have a question, please feel free to ask it. But I really wanted you to understand what we're seeing from a data standpoint for channel information. So before I even get started, I just want to be clear that right now I'm only showing online channels, right? So I chose not to put in any direct business or any call in if there's this like a central reservation system. I chose not to put those in, obviously because I feel like the online channels are the most impactful. So what we have done is really created our own index. And what we did is compare the daily net occupancy pickup for each specific future date range. So what we're saying is, in this yellow highlighted box, that in this 0 to 7 day booking window, we are booking 60% of the amount of bookings we booked last year for that same period. Okay, so again, we're booking 60% of the transient bookings that we booked last year in that booking window. And then you're able to see by the individual channels. So brand.com is booking a little over 50%. The OTAs are booking about 70% of what they booked last year for this booking window. And then the GDS, knowing that corporate travel is still, not yet completely back, is at about 25% of what they booked in that same booking window last year. So what you'll find is how I talk about each region is different because it's very local in the recovery, right? And so when you look here in that 0 to 7 day index, the OTAs are booking more compared to brand.com as an index to last year. And then if you look in the 8 to 14 day, they're closer. And then the 15 to 30 and the 31 to 90 booking windows, brand.com exceeds OTA. So I'd say this because when people are talking about, and I'll talk about this more at the end a little bit, but when you're talking about your marketing activity and investing in media and those types of things, I think it's critical to know which channels are booking your markets and when are those bookings coming in. So I think this could be very insightful. And do I know why it is the way it is? No. My hypothesis is that people who are more concerned with safety in the hotels and the cleanliness and all of those things are looking more on brand websites and maybe planning a little bit more further out and getting comfortable with a vacation, where people maybe who are just last minute wanting to get out, they could typically use OTAs more. But I thought this was very interesting, especially from a marketing standpoint and how you choose to invest in your media, as I know many people are already doing that or definitely planning on it. So a lot of the times we look at lead time, actualized data. That's how we typically do it in any of our products. But because the business environment is changing so rapidly, that we thought it was really critical to understand the metric as it's evolving over time. I'm going to look and see. I did get one question there. And the reason I'm going to stop, I just want to make sure that it's not something that's not understanding. Okay, so no, it's not that. So we'll come back to that question potentially. Okay, so maybe if I can, there we go. All right, so moving on to Canada. So you can see for Canada from the net booking activity, in 300,000 range is where they were pre-COVID, and we're 3 weeks of positive booking activity, which is fantastic, and up to about 34,000 bookings for the week of May 31st. And again, just looking at the summer occupancies, you're able to see some of the major markets, Vancouver leading that at about 8% occupancy. And then you see some of the other markets there and how they're faring. So keep in mind that those bookings are spread across, those 34,000 bookings are spread across the whole country. We're just, taking out some top markets to be able to understand those occupancies. Okay, so again, going back to the same information, and so you can see here very similar. So in North America overall, what we're seeing from a channel standpoint in these booking windows is similar. When we look at Europe in a minute, it's a little bit different. But you can see here again that in the 0 to 7 day booking window, the OTAs are exceeding brand.com as compared to last year from an index standpoint. And as you move further out, similar to what I mentioned in the United States, that the brand.com becomes a little bit stronger in the further out booking periods. Okay, so moving on to China. So I think it's always important. I don't know how many people in the audience are from China, but I think it's always important just to understand what's happening in China. And I think the next slide will be even more telling, and you'll be able to see, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that. But what you're looking at here is the activity from pre-COVID, and then China only spent really a very short time in the negative before coming back to positive net bookings. So from February 16th all the way through to May 31st, they've increased, and they're at about 650,000 net bookings as of that week. So getting very close to pre-COVID numbers. And again, looking at some of the main markets in China, you can see their occupancies. And it's interesting, right? Because you're looking at this 650,000 bookings, and then you're looking at kind of these small occupancy numbers. And for me, when I first see the data, I start to question that. How do you have so many bookings with such small occupancy? Well, first, as I mentioned, obviously those bookings are spread all across China, not just in these markets. But then what even makes it more clear is that in China, you're starting to see more recovery further out. Right? So if you're looking, if your eye just goes directly to that 31 to 90 day window, if you remember in the United States and Canada, we're nowhere near the total transient being about 45% of what we did last year. So for me, as I'm watching this data change every single day, this is very exciting, because although that 0 to 7 day booking window is great, right? We'll take in the occupancy, you know, right? We want that occupancy. It's hard to ever catch up to last year if you don't have business on the books. And it's also hard to not have pricing power when you don't have business on the books. So when you look at China, who's obviously ahead of most of us in the recovery, although this is mostly domestic China travel, you're starting to see that outside of that 15-day kind of standard booking window, they're starting to see business pick up there. So for all of you who are in other parts of the world, this is something positive to see, right? It seems like that short-term booking window comes back hard and fast, and then what follows is kind of the longer booking window. So it's very good to see that, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to Europe. So we'll start with Spain here. So Spain spent a number of weeks in the negative from a net reservation standpoint. And at the end of May, that turned around. So May 24th, it was just positive, 266 reservations. And then May 31st, it was a little bit higher at 3,000 reservations. So of course, we'll continue to monitor that, make sure that week over week, we're starting to see continued growth. And I think based on everything I'm hearing, you know, having an office in Spain and an employee in Spain, that we're definitely moving in the right direction. So hopefully we'll continue to see that. But what I found interesting is if you look at these major markets in Spain, you obviously see that the more leisure markets are seeing stronger occupancy than Barcelona and Madrid. So because of the summer months and people still probably vacationing similar to what they would typically do if they were staying, you know, within their own country, they're going to these maybe southern Spain cities, more beachy type things that we're also seeing in the United States. So I think that's very interesting from a summer standpoint. It probably fits in line with what we normally see, obviously at lower numbers, but you can definitely see that that's kind of a global thing, that people are traveling to more resort areas. So again, like I mentioned, it's different, right? When we look at the information in Spain, and I think we'll see similar in the UK, that the OTAs really are stronger, again, from an index standpoint than brand.com, really all the way through that 30-day booking window. You don't see brand.com ahead until the 31 to 90-day booking window. So again, if you are a hotelier in Spain and you're thinking about, you know, investing in media or doing impressions on an OTA, I think it's critical for you to understand, where is your business coming from? And this also could be an opportunity to look at your brand.com. What are things that you could do to maybe increase that as well? So definitely, I think a good opportunity to kind of take a step back, look at what's going on in your local market, and then either look at ways to change your strategy potentially, or if you're looking to book business, which I know most people are, what can you start to do on the OTAs because they're showing a lot of strength. Okay, so then the UK here, you can see, again, similar to Spain, it's only been a couple of weeks of positive growth. So May 24th, we turned it around, 5,000 positive reservations. And then you see that increase again the week of May 31st. And so again, hopefully we'll continue to see that positive. So then you can also look, Leeds, London, Manchester, and even Bristol pushing, 5% transient occupancy for the summer months. And I think it's interesting, right? When you look at 5%, it seems low, but that's averaged across these next 3 months. If you looked at next week, it could be much higher from a transient occupancy standpoint because that booking window is so short. You're definitely seeing higher occupancies closer in than you're seeing further out. So here you can see, again, like kind of further to what I just said, you're really not seeing much business outside of that 15-day booking window. So those reservations that we saw on the last slide, right, this 12,000 up here on May 31st, you can tell is really focused in on the next 14 days. So this is really, again, kind of last minute travel. It's what we're seeing everywhere. It's no different in the UK. But brand.com is a little bit stronger here. So again, if you're in UK, maybe an opportunity to invest in digital media or those types of things to drive business to your own brand website. All right, so considerations for building your recovery roadmap. So I'll just spend a few minutes here and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. But I think it's really important to make sure that you take this data and say, okay, now what am I going to go back to my job and do, right? And so obviously this is more hotel focused, but I think that really if you're in any part of hospitality, you can start to think about, what am I going to do differently to try to make this, this industry do better over the next 3 months, 6 months, year. And so I think one thing is evaluate the changes in your market demand, your feeder markets, and then your activity in the competition. So I think that this kind of goes outside of some of the things I even talked about, but I think it's really important. So first of all, I did talk about market demand, right? It's changing. The way we see demand is completely changing. From the booking window to the types of use cases in hotels, those types of things are changing. And also, if you've read anything on like Airbnb and some of those alternative accommodations, you're starting to see some strong comeback there too. And I think before, when demand existed for everyone, you didn't, as a hotelier, necessarily feel that impact of alternative accommodations. I think that that's going to change, at least in the short term. So that's something to consider. Then you talk about feeder markets. We'll be coming out in the next few weeks with more information about feeder markets. Obviously, we know that the travel right now is mostly domestic, but as a hotelier, whether you're in a major market or a resort area, where are your customers coming from? And I feel like, understanding the booking window, the channel, and where they're coming from, you would have a lot of information to create very targeted marketing efforts to be able to drive business to your hotel. So I feel like there's a lot of actually good opportunity as long as you have, the data to understand it and, make good decisions. And then competition activity, I talked about it just a second ago with the market demand, but I know that there are hotels being used for dorms, for colleges, to help people on the streets get off the streets. There's many use cases now that maybe didn't exist before. And so I think that when you're looking at your competitive set in any tool that you're using. It's important to understand what your competition's doing, and you might have to be willing to change your competitive set based on what's going on in the market. And of course, there are still hotels that are not opened yet, and so that's something to look at as well. So provide more value for your customers through inclusions, you know, when you're talking about your rate strategy. So, you know, I saw an interesting comment the other day, and I've mentioned this already, but I found it, you know, it hit home, where, you know, it's very easy for me to say, don't lower your rates. And I wish that we could not lower our rates, because I know how hard it is to come out of and recover from the rates being low. But I understand that people want to get their hotels open. They want to bring their employees back to work and drive occupancy any way they can. So I can appreciate that very much. But the thing is that especially in high demand markets, and if you're knowing the booking window and the channel, I feel like there's an opportunity for us as an industry to make sure that we are providing value to the customer by trying to save the rate, right? And so when you think about the fact that it's a drive market, why not include valet parking? Right? Very simple, but it's a good way to keep your ADR up, but it provides value to the customer, because you know that, especially if you're in a city, that they're gonna have to valet park their car. So I think some of those thoughts should be really part of your strategy, so we can continue to hold rate. I know it's not going to go back to pre-COVID, but so we're not actually lowering rates to the floor in the booking window, right? We know the booking window is 0 to 7 days. In some cases, it's 0 to 3 days. To lower rates in that period, I think is not always going to prove beneficial. And something to be mindful of too, as you saw when we looked, especially at the United States, when you're looking further out, you're getting a lot of that business from brand.com. Well, if you all of a sudden lower your rates 3 days prior to that guest arrival on the OTAs, how, you know, if they know that, they're going to cancel and potentially rebook at a lower rate in your own hotel. So you want to make sure that you're protecting that base business and those rates that you've already gotten, you know, when you're looking right at that 0 to 3 day before arrival. And then last but not least, I think this is what we spent the most time on today, is really understanding the booking window by channel in your competitive set and your market to more effectively market to customers. I mean, the data is there. It's very clear on which channels are driving the business and what the booking window is. And now it's your opportunity to take advantage of having that knowledge to be able to drive occupancy to your hotel and try to create demand. I mean, there's a lot of search data out there, and if you're seeing that the searches are happening, then investing in some media may actually create demand, where I would say 2 months ago, I would have never said that. You're not going to create demand by running a marketing campaign. So I think there's some opportunities now as people start to really search and think about traveling again. So if you want any more information about you know, some of our recommendations or insights into the recovery plan, you know, here's the link to our site. I think just last week we worked with HSMAI and put together 3 ebooks around revenue management, marketing, and sales. And so those are available here as well as on HSMAI's recovery site. So that could give you some insights into, you know, some of the best practices. And I think that we have time for some Q&A. So I think I see a few questions. So I'm going to. Okay, good. First question is very, very good. So can you remind us of the mix of participants in Demand 360? How many major versus independent brands or independent hotels? It's a fantastic question, and I actually planned on mentioning that. So we're probably about 70% brand, 30% independent. In major markets, we're heavy on independent. So yeah, so it's a good percentage mix, I would say, in major markets. When you're talking about, you know, outside of the United States and then secondary and tertiary markets in the United States, we're probably more brand heavy. Okay, so then the next question. China booking windows seem to increase for shorter lead times as at 120% compared to last year. Yeah, it's a very good point. And I didn't make it on the slide, but it's a very good point. So we're actually seeing that in quite a few markets, especially like I mentioned, some of these resort towns where in that 0 to 7 day booking window, the bookings are more than last year for that same booking window. And so China is seeing that. And so that short-term booking window recovery is quite strong in many markets. And so we sit there and say to ourselves internally, if you're above last year for every 0 to 7 day booking window, then you could do better than you did last year. That's not something I think we want to take the risk on. And I don't know at what percentage each hotel would have to be to say, okay, I can do better than last year. We really want to find ways to get that base business on the books even before group starts to really rebound. It's good to get that base business, but yes, very good point to bring that up, that China is up compared to last year as far as transient bookings in the 0 to 7 day booking window. So I think that, you know, it could be a couple of things, right? Just the way the traveler's booking right now. And then also with the lack of group, there's more availability in the market than there could have been last year. So I think that probably those two play a big part in that. So I'm going to just put that I answered those questions. Have you seen any shift from traditional hotels to alternative accommodations? To be honest, I don't do as much of the research as I should with the alternative accommodations. I know that I've read a few articles in the past week that they're actually seeing strong demand. I imagine, you know, there's two schools of thought, right? One is that the short-term rental, you know, you're kind of more isolated, those types of things, and then hotels have more cleanliness policies around them. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do believe as a hotelier, if you weren't paying attention to it before, you should be paying attention to it now to understand, you know, what kind of occupancies and demand are they driving, and are they going to take away from the little bit of demand that exists today? So I definitely think it's important to pay attention to. The next question, what is the mix between midweek and weekend? Assume that leisure has likely more weight for now. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see it more on the weekends, especially like holiday weekends. You know, for the United States, I imagine as we come into 4th of July, Canada Day coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll see that strong leisure business on the weekend. But for whoever asked that question, if you're looking for a specific market, please reach out. We can definitely segment the data by week and weekday to give you more insight if you're interested. May we get a copy of this presentation? Audrey, I don't know if you could answer, but I'm fine with it if I can send it to you and you could.
Absolutely, we will be sharing, we can share it. Thank you so much, Katie. And then we will also be posting the entire session, so thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, I don't know how much time I have left for questions. I have a few more. Should I keep going or?
Take one more, Katie. We're
okay.
Almost on the time, but take one more, please.
Okay, so well, the next one was, do you have similar stats about Dubai or UAE market in terms of recovery? Yes, we do. So if you don't know who your local TravelClick or Amadeus representative is there, please send me a note. I'm happy to help you get that information. And then how does OTA versus brand compare versus last year? Looks like OTA share based on your numbers are increasing overall. So what I showed was an index compared to last year by channel. So it depends on how many reservations were booked last year for that channel, right? But Nicholas, if you have specific questions, there are other ways I can show that data. It becomes even confusing for myself sometimes, which is why I didn't put it in the presentation today. But if you wanted to reach out on a specific market, we can get it more in like a percentage standpoint as opposed to an index. So if you want to come to me separately on that, we'll be happy to help you with that too. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for providing such an in-depth update on the travel trends your organization is monitoring for the entire industry. And thank you very much for that recovery plan. I think everybody's going to be out there grabbing at that quickly, and they probably already started. This is the type of information that is critical as the industry rebounds. And then just as a reminder, as the questions came in, each of the sessions today, including Katie's, will be made available within the next couple of days on YouTube. And Katie, as Katie had mentioned, she is willing to share the deck, and we will make sure that is posted and available for everybody. So thank you again.